Before anyone ever reached its summit, Nanga Parbat had already become known as the Killer Mountain. Between 1895 and 1953, 31 people died trying to climb it. No other mountain has claimed more lives before its first successful ascent. More than 70 years later, the mountain remains one of the deadliest of all 14 8,000ers. But the danger is not spread evenly across the climb. Some sections record relatively few fatal accidents. Others have repeatedly become the point where expeditions unravel. This is the Kinsofer route on the Diamir Face, the standard route used by most expeditions today. Using decades of expedition records, this video follows the climb stage by stage to reveal where Nanga Parbat is statistically at its most dangerous. The historical fatality-to-summit ratio stands at approximately 21% in the modern era, meaning roughly 1 in 5 successful summits has been accompanied by a death. Before 1990, that ratio was 77%. The dramatic improvement came from modern equipment, better fixed ropes, improved weather forecasting, and the availability of helicopter evacuation from lower elevations. Yet, despite those advances, Nanga Parbat remains one of the most dangerous mountains on Earth. According to data compiled by Eberhard Jurgalski and cross-referenced with the Himalayan database, Nanga Parbat has the third highest fatality rate among all 14 8,000ers, behind only Annapurna and K2. Those figures explain why the mountain is feared. They do not explain where climbers are most likely to die. For that, the route itself has to be followed, one stage at a time. Stage 1. From Diamir Base Camp, the route climbs the lower buttress of the Diamir Face through rocky gullies and steep snow slopes to reach Camp 1. Expedition records compiled from multiple sources, including the Himalayan database, show this stage carries a relatively low concentration of fatalities compared to higher sections. But that does not make it safe. Rockfall is a persistent and documented hazard from the very first hour on the route. The Diamir Face receives intense solar radiation through the day, and the freeze-thaw cycle that results loosens stones from the upper buttresses and channels them down through the gully systems that the route crosses. Every rockfall is different. Some involve scattered stones. Others release entire sections of fractured cliff. Teams move through the lower section in pre-dawn hours, specifically to reduce this risk, taking advantage of the coldest part of the day before the sun begins destabilizing the slopes. Historical data shows that a portion of Nanga Parbat's lower route fatalities have been attributed to rockfall rather than altitude-related illness. Unlike altitude sickness or climbing mistakes, rockfall requires no error from the climber. Camp 1 sits in a relatively sheltered position on the upper buttress, but the approach crosses ground where the outcome depends largely on timing rather than skill. The climb begins with falling rock. Higher up, the mountain introduces dangers that are even harder to escape. Stage 2. The Kinsofer Wall. Between Camp 1 and Camp 2, the route crosses the section that gives the standard route its name, the Kinsofer Wall, a steep band of rock and ice requiring fixed ropes and genuine technical climbing at altitude. Progress slows dramatically, increasing the time climbers spend exposed on the wall. Global Summit Guide's route analysis documents persistent rockfall on the Kinsofer Wall as one of the defining dangers of the standard route, with incidents of fixed rope damage from falling debris recorded during the climbing season. The combination of technical climbing demand and rockfall exposure makes this one of the more concentrated risk zones on the lower mountain. A fall here, at this elevation, is unlikely to be survivable. Historical expedition data shows that fixed rope incidents and falls on the technical sections account for a measurable proportion of fatalities in this elevation band. Fixed rope systems on the Kinsofer Wall can be buried, damaged, or absent depending on when a team is climbing, adding route-finding difficulty to an already demanding passage. Every foot of technical ground gained through the Kinsofer Wall on the ascent must be reversed on the descent, in total exhaustion, after the longest day of the expedition. The higher the route climbs, the less room there is for error. Above the Kinsofer Wall lies the section where expedition records identify the route's deadliest hazard. Stage 3. the Kinsofer ice field to Camp 3. Above the Kinsofer wall, the route crosses the broad Kinsofer ice field to reach Camp 3. This is where avalanche risk becomes the dominant hazard. Avalanches account for the single largest cause of death across all stages and all routes on Nanga Parbat, according to historical expedition records. The Kinsofer ice field and the slopes above it are loaded by the same weather systems that give the mountain its reputation for sudden, extreme conditions. Nanga Parbat sits directly in the path of moisture-laden air masses moving north from the Pakistani plains, and those systems deposit heavy snowfall on the upper face with extraordinary speed. Fresh snow can accumulate faster than it has time to stabilize, leaving entire slopes prone to failure. Teams that set out from Camp 2 in stable conditions have been caught by storm-driven snowfall and avalanche conditions before reaching Camp 3. The ice field has no shelter from wind or falling snow, and teams caught in deteriorating conditions have found that retreat toward Camp 2 can be as hazardous as continuing upward. The 1937 disaster on the Rupal Face, when an avalanche buried Camp 4 and killed 16 members of the expedition overnight, remains the deadliest avalanche disaster in Himalayan mountaineering history. Although it occurred on a different route, it remains the clearest demonstration of how rapidly Nanga Parbat's weather can transform conditions. By Camp 3, the challenge is no longer simply climbing higher. It is staying ahead of conditions that can change faster than any team can react. Stage 4. From Camp 3 to Camp 4 and the shoulder. The broad snow plateau connecting Camp 3 to Camp 4 sits at the threshold of the death zone. Statistically, this section records relatively few direct fatalities during ascent. The data changes dramatically once climbers turn around. The shoulder is completely exposed to the weather systems that cross the upper mountain without warning. Teams returning from the summit in deteriorating conditions have been stranded on the shoulder in full whiteout with no shelter and no viable line of descent. In poor visibility, even following an established route becomes difficult. Exhaustion at this elevation after the summit push has already depleted physical and cognitive reserves, making every decision harder and every error more consequential. Expedition records show that a significant proportion of Nanga Parbat's weather and exhaustion-related deaths are concentrated near this elevation, specifically during descent after a summit attempt. Most serious incidents on the shoulder occur in the final hours of descent, after climbers have often been moving for 20 hours or more at extreme altitude. The shoulder looks deceptively flat and manageable. In a closing storm, after 20 hours above Camp 4, it is neither. Beyond the shoulder lies the final stage of the climb. It is also where expedition records show the highest concentration of fatalities. One odd fact about Nanga Parbat: it was the first 8,000er ever climbed in alpine style. Fast, light, and without supplemental oxygen. On the very first successful ascent. Herman Boel's 1953 solo push to the summit was not a planned strategy. After his teammates turned back, he continued alone, reaching the summit at 7 in the evening. At that moment, he had already spent more than 15 hours climbing above 7,000 meters. He then spent the night standing on a small ledge at over 7,925 meters in temperatures far below freezing, without a sleeping bag, because he was too exhausted to descend. It was the highest unplanned bivouac in mountaineering history at the time. He returned to camp 40 hours after leaving it. In 1953, Buell's approach, minimal equipment, no oxygen, and no support team, was considered impossible to repeat. Decades later, the same principles became the foundation of modern elite Himalayan climbing. Stage 5. The Death Zone and Summit Push. Above Camp 4, the route enters the Death Zone, the zone at which the human body cannot acclimatize, only deteriorate. The push from Camp 4 to the summit and back is a round trip of 10 to 14 hours at an altitude where the body is actively consuming itself for energy, cognitive function is impaired by oxygen deprivation, and a weather closure can arrive faster than a safe descent can be completed. Historical expedition data and analysis from the Himalayan database confirm that descent from the summit is consistently the highest fatality phase of any Nanga Parbat expedition. The most dangerous moment often arrives after the greatest achievement has already been completed. Climbers who have successfully reached the top face the full technical demands of the Kinsofer wall on the way back down, while carrying the accumulated fatigue of the entire climb. Falls during descent account for a significant proportion of Nanga Parbat's death zone fatalities.
The mountain's pre-1990 fatality rate of 77% has now been reduced to 21% through decades of improvements in equipment, forecasting, route preparation, and experience. But the statistics reveal the same pattern across recorded seasons. The summit is not where the expedition ends. It is where the most dangerous phase begins.